Commerce Station Delta 7 floated in the dark space between star systems like a giant metal flower. Its 6 arms stretched out in different directions, each one filled with shops, restaurants, and docking bays where ships from across the galaxy came to trade. The station never slept. Day and night meant nothing here. Aliens of dozens of different species walked through the wide corridors, talking in languages that sounded like music, grinding metal or rushing wind. The Zephyrians looked like walking crystals, their bodies catching and reflecting the station lights in rainbow patterns. They moved with slow, careful steps and spoke in voices that rang like bells. The Caliph were covered in thick brown fur and had long tails that swished behind them as they hurried between the market stalls. Their eyes were large and black, and they chattered constantly in high, quick voices. The Noxians wore special suits filled with the poisonous gas they needed to breathe. Their suits were bulky and made soft hissing sounds as they walked. In the middle of all this normal station life, something dangerous arrived. The ship that docked at Bay 17 looked ordinary enough from the outside. It was small, dark gray, and had no special markings. But inside that ship was Vexthal, and Vexthal was a killer. Vexthal belonged to a species called the Shadowkin. They were the stuff of nightmares for most of the galaxy. Standing 7 feet tall, their skin was black as space itself and felt like touching armor. They had 4 eyes arranged around their head, each one able to see different kinds of light. This meant they could see heat, could see in total darkness, and could spot the smallest movement from far away. But their most feared ability was how they could bend light around their bodies and become invisible. The Shadowkin had built their reputation over hundreds of years. They were assassins, spies, and hunters who took contracts from anyone willing to pay their high prices. Governments hired them to remove troublesome enemies. Crime bosses used them to eliminate rivals. Even honest merchants sometimes paid Shadowkin to deal with pirates who threatened their trade routes. Few people had ever seen a Shadowkin and lived to tell about it. Vexthal had killed 43 beings across 12 different species during its career. It had eliminated a Threnody war chief who could break steel with his bare hands. It had poisoned a Mentari psychic who could read thoughts from 3 rooms away. It had strangled a Caliph crime boss while invisible, leaving the body for his own guards to find. Each kill had been perfect, clean, and impossible to trace back to its employer. Now Vexthal had come to Delta 7 for target number 44. The contract came from the Meridian Trading Consortium, a group of wealthy alien merchants who controlled shipping routes in this part of the galaxy. They had a problem named Jake Morrison. Jake Morrison was human, and humans were still new to galactic trade. Most species thought of humans as weak, soft creatures who had barely learned to travel between stars. They had no natural weapons, no armor-like skin, no special abilities that made them dangerous. They seemed to get by on luck and stubbornness more than any real skill. But somehow, this particular human had been cutting into Meridian profits. For months, Jake worked as a cargo coordinator on Delta 7. His job was to help organize shipments, match cargo with ships that had empty space, and keep track of what goods moved through the station. It should have been boring work that nobody paid attention to. Instead, Jake had developed an unusual talent for knowing exactly which cargo would be most profitable and which ships could carry it fastest and safest to its destination. In the 6 months since Jake had started working on the station, shipping efficiency through Delta 7 had increased by 30%. Cargo that used to sit in storage bays for weeks now moved within days. Ships that used to leave half-empty now departed with every available space filled with profitable goods. The humans were making money, the station was making money, and everyone seemed happy, everyone except the Meridian Trading Consortium. Their carefully planned monopolies were crumbling as Jake helped smaller traders find profitable routes. Their expensive ships sat empty while cheaper human vessels carried the best cargo. Their profits dropped every month while human trading companies grew stronger. So they hired Vexthal to solve their human problem. Vexthal spent its first day on the station studying the target. Jake Morrison looked exactly like what most aliens expected from a human. He stood about 6 feet tall with brown hair and ordinary brown eyes. He wore the standard blue coveralls of a station worker and carried a simple data pad for tracking cargo. When he walked through the corridors, he moved with the casual, relaxed pace of someone who belonged there. The Shadowkin watched from the shadows as Jake went about his daily routine. Every morning, Jake started work at the main cargo control center, a large room filled with computer screens and communication equipment. He would check the overnight reports, see which new ships had arrived, and review what cargo needed to be moved. Then he would walk through the station, visiting different merchants and ship captains to discuss their needs. What impressed Vexthel was how easily Jake talked with aliens of every species. He seemed to know at least a few words in dozens of different languages. When he spoke with the crystal-like Zephyrians, he used the slow, formal tones they preferred. With the energetic Caliph, he matched their quick chatter and animated gestures. Even with the Noxians in their breathing suits, he found ways to communicate clearly despite the mechanical translation devices they used. But to Vexthel, Jake looked completely vulnerable. He carried no weapons that the Shadowkin could detect. He wore no armor or protective gear. He traveled the station alone, often taking routes through quiet corridors where few other people passed. He seemed to trust everyone he met and never looked around nervously or checked for potential threats. In Vexthel's experience, creatures this trusting usually died quickly and easily. The Shadowkin had killed dozens of beings who were much more dangerous than this soft human. Jake Morrison would be simple prey. The station's artificial day cycle dimmed to artificial night. Vexthel activated its cloaking ability and began to follow Jake more closely. The human finished his work shift and walked to the residential section of the station where he had a small apartment. He stopped at a food vendor run by a friendly Khalif family and bought something that smelled like cooked vegetables and grain. He ate while walking, occasionally nodding hello to other station residents he passed. Vexthel studied every detail of Jake's behavior, looking for patterns and weaknesses. The assassination would need to look like an accident or the result of random crime. Nothing that could be traced back to the Meridian Consortium. The Shadowkin had already identified several good locations for the kill. A maintenance corridor that Jake used as a shortcut, a quiet observation deck where he sometimes went to think, the cargo bay where he worked alone during night shifts. Tomorrow, Vexthel decided, it would choose the perfect moment and add another easy kill to its record. The human had no idea that death was already stalking him through the corridors of Delta 7. 3 days had passed since Vexthel began hunting Jake Morrison, and the Shadowkin was growing increasingly uncomfortable. What should have been a simple assassination was turning into something strange and unsettling. The human continued his daily routines, but patterns were emerging that made no sense for an innocent cargo coordinator. On the second day of surveillance, Vexthel noticed that Jake's conversations with other station residents always happened in very specific locations. When Jake stopped to chat with the Caliph food vendor, he positioned himself next to a security checkpoint where the station guards could see everything that happened nearby. When he discussed shipping schedules with a Zephyrian crystal merchant, their conversation took place directly under one of the main surveillance cameras that monitored the commercial district. At first, Vexthel thought this was just coincidence. Humans were supposed to be careless creatures who paid little attention to their surroundings. But as the pattern repeated throughout the day, the Shadowkin began to suspect something else was happening. Jake seemed to be deliberately choosing places where he would be visible to station security and recorded by monitoring equipment. Even more disturbing was how Jake's routes through the station changed every day, but in ways that corresponded perfectly with shift changes in the security department. On day 1, Jake had taken a path through the lower maintenance levels during the time when those areas were patrolled by the morning security team. On day 2, he used a different route that avoided those same areas during the afternoon shift, changed when different guards were on duty. On day 3, his path changed again, this time avoiding areas during the exact hours when Vexthel had established observation posts. The Shadowkin's 4 eyes tracked every detail of Jake's movements, looking for some explanation that didn't involve the human knowing about the surveillance. Perhaps Jake was naturally paranoid. Perhaps he had been trained in basic security procedures as part of his job. Perhaps he was just following random impulses that happened to create these patterns, but then came the moment that made Vexthal Black blood run cold. Jake was walking through a quiet corridor in the station's middle section, the kind of place where few people pass during the day shift. Vexthal was following about 20 feet behind, completely invisible thanks to its cloaking ability. The corridor was lined with closed doors leading to storage rooms and maintenance areas. The lighting was dim, creating plenty of shadows where a Shadowkin could hide. Halfway down the corridor, Jake stopped walking. He turned around slowly and looked directly at the spot where Vexthal was standing. For a long moment, human and Shadowkin stared at each other. Jake's brown eyes seemed to focus exactly on Vexthal's position, even though the alien was completely invisible to normal sight. The human's expression was calm, almost curious, like someone who had noticed something interesting but not threatening. Then Jake smiled and continued walking. Vexthal stood frozen in place for several minutes after the human disappeared around the corner. No creature should have been able to see through Shadowkin cloaking technology. The light-bending ability had been perfected over thousands of years and had never failed against any known species. Yet Jake Morrison had looked directly at the invisible assassin as if he could see every detail. The next day brought even more troubling observations. Vexthal watched from a hidden position as Jake mediated a dispute between two alien merchants in the main trading area of the station. A Zephyrian crystal seller was arguing with a Calith trader about a shipment of contaminated goods. The argument was growing heated, with both aliens making aggressive gestures and moving closer to each other in threatening ways. The Zephyrian's crystalline body was beginning to glow with the angry orange light. That meant it was preparing to use its natural electrical discharge ability. The Calith's fur was standing up along its spine, and its claws were extending from its fingertips. Both aliens were reaching toward the weapons they carried at their sides. Jake stepped between them with movements that looked casual and relaxed. But Vexthal noticed something that the other observers missed. As the human positioned himself between the angry aliens, he placed his feet in a stance that would allow him to dodge attacks from either direction. His hands hung loosely at his sides, but his fingers were positioned to grab weapons or block strikes. His shoulders were slightly hunched in a way that would protect his neck and throat from claws or energy discharges. Most importantly, Jake's eyes never stopped moving. While he spoke in calm, friendly tones to both aliens, his gaze constantly shifted between their hands, their weapons, and their body language. He was tracking every sign that might indicate which one would attack first, and how they would do it. The dispute ended peacefully after Jake suggested a fair way to handle the contaminated cargo problem. Both aliens agreed to his solution and went back to their business. But Vexthal had seen something that chilled the Shadowkin to its core. Throughout the entire confrontation, Jake Morrison had been prepared for combat. He had been ready to fight two dangerous aliens simultaneously and had positioned himself to survive such a fight. This was not the behavior of a soft, harmless human cargo coordinator. Later that day, Vexthal was hiding in a ventilation shaft above the communication center when it overheard a conversation that made everything much worse. Jake was talking with Lisa Chun, the station's communications officer, about routine maintenance reports. "We've been getting some unusual energy readings from Section 12, Lisa was saying as she worked at her control panel. "Nothing dangerous, but the sensors keep detecting power fluctuations in areas that should be empty." "Interesting," Jake replied, but his tone was anything but casual. "I've been planning to do some routine maintenance checks in those areas anyway. Just making sure all the cargo handling equipment is working properly." "Do you need security backup for the maintenance work?" Lisa asked. "No, I think I can handle it myself," Jake said with a slight smile. "I'm pretty good at spotting problems in dark, quiet places." Vexthal's multiple hearts began beating faster. Section 12 was exactly where the Shadowkin had been establishing its observation posts. The energy fluctuations that Lisa mentioned were probably caused by Shadowkin technology that was supposed to be undetectable by standard station sensors. and Jake's offer to do maintenance checks in those areas was clearly a threat disguised. As innocent work duties, the human knew it was being hunted. Worse, the human seemed to know exactly where its hunter was hiding that evening. As the station's artificial day cycle shifted to night, Vexthal made a decision that went against all its training and experience. Instead of continuing to stalk Jake Morrison, the Shadowkin would retreat to its ship and reconsider the entire mission. But as Vexthal moved through the station's corridors toward the docking bay, it realized that Jake was following the same route. The human was about 50 feet ahead, walking at his normal casual pace and occasionally stopping to examine cargo containers or check wall-mounted information displays. But every turn that Vexthal took, every corridor the Shadowkin chose, Jake had walked through just minutes before, for the first time in its long career as an assassin. Vexthal began to suspect that it was not the hunter in this situation. The human cargo coordinator, who looked so soft and helpless, was displaying all the signs of a predator who had detected a threat and was preparing to deal with it. The Shadowkin had come to Delta 7 expecting to find easy prey. Instead, it had found something that recognized it as a threat and was calmly, methodically preparing to eliminate that threat. Jake Morrison was not running away or calling for help or showing any signs of panic. He was behaving like a creature that had faced dangerous enemies before and knew exactly how to handle them. As Vexthal finally reached its ship and sealed the airlock behind it, one thought dominated the alien assassin's mind. The humans were not what they seemed to be, and Jake Morrison was definitely not just a cargo coordinator. Vexthal had spent the night aboard its ship, trying to understand what was happening on Delta 7. The Shadowkin reviewed everything it had observed about Jake Morrison, looking for some explanation that made sense. But every analysis led to the same impossible conclusion. The human knew it was being hunted and was actively preparing to turn the tables on its hunter the next morning. Vexthal made a decision that went against every instinct it possessed. Instead of abandoning the mission, the Shadowkin would confront this mystery directly. It would follow Jake Morrison more closely, take greater risks, and find out what the human was really capable of. Vexthal had not built its reputation by running away from challenges, no matter how unusual they might be. Jake's morning routine seemed normal at first. He reported to the cargo control center, reviewed the overnight shipping reports, and made his usual rounds through the station's commercial areas. But when he finished his official duties, something different happened. Instead of returning to his apartment or stopping at the food vendors, Jake walked toward the station's lower levels where few people went during normal working hours. Vexthal activated its cloaking ability and followed at a careful distance. The corridors in the lower levels were narrower and darker than the main areas of the station. The walls were lined with pipes and cables that carried power and water to the upper levels. The air smelled of metal and recycled atmosphere, and the constant hum of machinery made it difficult to hear footsteps or other small sounds. Jake walked through these corridors with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where he was going. He took several turns without hesitation, leading deeper into the maintenance areas of the station. Vexthal noticed that each corridor they entered was slightly more isolated than the last, with fewer security cameras and less chance of encountering other station residents. At first, the Shadowkin thought this was perfect. Jake was leading them to exactly the kind of isolated location where an assassination could be carried out without witnesses. But as they went deeper into the station's lower levels, Vexthal began to realize something disturbing. The human was not wandering aimlessly through the maintenance areas. He was following a specific route that seemed designed to funnel any follower into increasingly confined spaces. The corridors were getting narrower. The side passages that could serve as escape routes were becoming fewer. The ceiling was getting lower, making it harder for a 7-foot-tall Shadowkin to move quickly if sudden action became necessary. Jake Morrison was herding his pursuer like a farmer, driving livestock into a pen. When Jake stopped at a particular junction and turned around, Vexthal quickly pressed against the wall and remained perfectly still. The human looked directly at the spot where the invisible assassin was hiding, and his expression was no longer the friendly, casual look he wore around other station residents. His brown eyes were cold and calculating, like those of a predator that had cornered its prey. "You know," Jake said, speaking to the empty air in a conversational tone, "back on Earth we had apex predators too. Big cats, mostly beautiful creatures really. Lions, tigers, leopards. They were patient hunters who could stalk their prey for hours without being detected." Vextel's 4 eyes widened in shock. The human was speaking directly to it even though it was completely invisible. No known species should have been able to detect a cloaked shadowkin. Yet Jake Morrison was looking straight at it and speaking as if they were having a normal conversation. "These big cats were amazing hunters," Jake continued, his voice echoing slightly in the narrow corridor. "They had night vision, incredible speed, razor-sharp claws, and enough strength to bring down prey much larger than themselves. They were perfectly designed killing machines that had ruled their territories for millions of years." Jake began walking again, but slower now, and he kept talking while he moved. Vextel had no choice but to continue following, but every step felt like moving deeper into a trap. The corridor ahead curved to the right, and beyond that curve, the Shadowkin could see only darkness. "But even these perfect predators became prey when humans showed up," Jake said. "Not because humans were stronger or faster or had better natural weapons. We didn't. Humans were smaller than most of the big cats, slower, weaker, with no claws or fangs or natural armor. By all logical measures, we should have been easy prey for these apex predators." The corridor curved again, and now Vextel could see that they were approaching a dead end. The maintenance area ahead was a small chamber filled with pipes and electrical equipment with only one way in or out. If the human intended to make a stand, he had chosen the perfect location. Any attacker would have to approach from the front, with no room to maneuver and no escape routes if the fight went badly. So how did weak, slow, soft humans become the dominant predators on Earth? Jake asked, stopping at the entrance to the maintenance chamber. "We did it by being smarter than our prey. We studied their habits, learned their weaknesses, and turned their own hunting instincts against them. We made them come to us on our terms in places where we held every advantage." Jake stepped into the maintenance chamber and turned around to face the corridor entrance. The lighting in the chamber was poor, creating deep shadows between the industrial equipment. But somehow the human's eyes seemed to track Vextel's movement even in the darkness. "The big cats would stalk what they thought was helpless human prey," Jake continued. "They would follow their target deeper into the forest, getting closer and closer, preparing for the perfect moment to strike. But what they didn't realize was that the human had been leading them into a trap. The prey had become the predator, and the predator was about to become the victim." Vextel felt something it had never experienced before in 43 successful assassinations: fear, cold terror that made its black blood feel like ice in its veins. The human was describing exactly what had been happening for the past several days. Jake Morrison had been playing the role of helpless prey while systematically leading the Shadowkin deeper into a carefully planned trap. "The fascinating thing about this role reversal," Jake said, leaning casually against a large pipe, "is that the predators never saw it coming. Right up until the moment the trap was sprung, they still thought they were the hunters. They still believed they were in control of the situation. They still expected an easy kill." The maintenance chamber fell silent except for the hum of machinery and the sound of Vextel's rapidly beating hearts. The Shadowkin realized that every escape route now required passing within arm's reach of Jake Morrison. Every corridor they had walked through had been chosen to eliminate options and force this exact confrontation in this exact location. "Of course," Jake added with a slight smile that looked nothing like the friendly expressions he had shown to other station residents. "The big cats on Earth went extinct because they never learned to recognize when they had stopped being hunters and started being prey. I wonder if other species are capable of learning that lesson." Vextel understood with crystal clarity that the assassination mission had failed before it had even begun. Jake Morrison had been expecting an attack, had identified his attacker, and had spent days preparing the perfect response. The human was not an innocent cargo coordinator who happened to be good at his job. He was something far more dangerous. And he had been hunting the Shadowkin from the moment Vexthal had arrived on Delta-7 for the first time in its career. The galaxy's most feared assassin was trapped by its intended prey. And the prey was looking directly at it with the cold, patient eyes of an apex predator. Jake Morrison stepped further into the maintenance chamber and activated a small device on his belt. Suddenly, the chamber was filled with bright white light that made every corner visible. Vexthal instinctively pressed deeper into the shadows, but the human's eyes continued to track its movement with perfect accuracy. "The thing about your cloaking technology," Jake said, in the same casual tone he used when discussing shipping schedules, "is that it only works against visible light. It bends photons around your body very efficiently, making you invisible to most optical sensors and biological eyes. Really impressive engineering, actually." Vexthal felt its confidence crumbling like a structure built on unstable ground. The Shadowkin cloaking ability had been the species' greatest advantage for thousands of years. No known technology should have been able to detect a cloaked Shadowkin. Yet this human was discussing it like he had studied detailed technical specifications. "But invisible doesn't mean undetectable," Jake continued, pulling out his datapad and showing the screen to the empty air where Vexthal was hiding. The display showed a thermal image with a clearly visible humanoid shape outlined in red and yellow heat signatures. "Your body temperature is about 15 degrees higher than the station's ambient temperature. Even with your cloaking active, you show up beautifully on thermal sensors." The Shadowkin's 4 eyes widened in horror as Jake swiped to another screen on his datapad. This one showed electromagnetic field patterns, with obvious disruptions marking Vexthal's location. A third screen displayed atmospheric analysis data showing trace amounts of Shadowkin pheromones floating in the air. "Your nervous system generates a distinctive electromagnetic field," Jake explained, like a teacher giving a lesson to a student. "Different from any other known species. Very easy to track once you know what to look for. And your species secretes identification pheromones that can be detected by the right equipment even in a recycled atmosphere like this station uses." Jake put the datapad away and leaned against a support beam, looking completely relaxed despite being alone in a confined space with one of the galaxy's most dangerous assassins. His behavior made no sense unless he was completely confident that he controlled the situation. "Human military intelligence has been studying Shadowkin hunting techniques for about 8 months now," Jake continued. "Ever since your people started taking contracts against human shipping operations in the Kepler sector. We've analyzed 17 different assassination attempts, including the methods used, the technology employed, and the specific individuals who carried out the attacks." Vexthal's multiple hearts were now beating so fast that the sound seemed to echo in the small chamber. The human was describing information that should have been impossible for any non-Shadowkin to obtain. The contracts in the Kepler sector had been handled with perfect secrecy. The targets had been eliminated cleanly with no witnesses. There should have been no way for human investigators to connect those deaths to Shadowkin operations. "Take your last assignment before this one," Jake said, consulting his datapad again. "The elimination of Captain Rodriguez on the merchant vessel Lucky Strike. You infiltrated the ship during a routine supply stop, used a paralytic toxin to incapacitate the target, then made it look like a heart attack brought on by the stress of deep space travel. Very clean work, very professional." The Shadowkin felt like its world was collapsing. The Rodriguez assassination had been Vexthal's most careful operation. The death had been investigated by both human and alien authorities, and all of them had concluded that the captain had died of natural causes. There had been no evidence of foul play, no traces of foreign substances, and no indication that anyone else had been aboard the ship. What Captain Rodriguez didn't know, Jake continued, was that Lucky Strike was carrying experimental human surveillance equipment disguised as standard cargo containers. The equipment recorded everything that happened during the attack, including detailed scans of the intruder who killed the captain. Jake showed another screen on his datapad. This one displayed a perfect 3-dimensional image of Vexthal, captured by sensors that the Shadowkin had never known existed. The image showed every detail of the alien's black chitinous skin, its 4 eyes, and even the specialized organs that allowed it to secrete paralytic toxins. "We've been tracking you specifically for 6 months," Jake said. Vexthal of the 7th. Shadowkin clan, trained on the assassination world of Kethmar, responsible for 43 confirmed kills across 12 species. You have a distinctive scar on your left shoulder from a training accident when you were young, and you prefer to attack from the right side because your dominant hand gives you better accuracy with throwing weapons. Each piece of information hit Vexthal like a physical blow. The scar had been caused by a mentor's blade during advanced combat training decades ago. The preference for right-side attacks was a personal quirk that the Shadowkin had never mentioned to anyone. These were details that only Vexthal itself should have known. Human intelligence networks have been watching Shadowkin operations throughout this entire sector, Jake explained. We know about your clan structure, your training methods, your preferred weapons, and your standard operating procedures. We've identified 47 individual Shadowkin assassins currently operating in human space, including their real names, their recent contracts, and their current locations. Jake activated another function on his datapad, and the holographic display appeared in the air between them. The display showed a star map with dozens of red dots scattered across multiple systems. Each dot pulsed gently, indicating an active target. Each of those red dots represents a Shadowkin operative, Jake said. The display updates in real time based on intelligence reports from human agents throughout the galaxy. Right now, I can tell you exactly where each of your colleagues is located, what contracts they're working on, and when they're expected to complete their missions. Vexthal stared at the holographic display with growing horror. If the humans could track every Shadowkin assassin in real time, it meant that the species' entire way of life was under threat. The Shadowkin had built their power and reputation on being invisible, undetectable, and impossible to predict. But the humans had turned them into open books that could be read and understood completely. The really impressive part, Jake continued, is that we've done all of this without your people ever realizing they were being watched. Every Shadowkin assassination in human space for the past 8 months has been monitored, recorded, and analyzed. Your victims died exactly as planned, but their deaths also provided us with more intelligence about your species. Jake put away his datapad and pulled out a small, dark object from his pocket. Vexthal recognized it immediately and felt its black blood turn to ice. The object was a Shadowkin scent gland, the specialized organ that every member of the species used to mark territory and identify clan membership. The gland could only be harvested from a dead Shadowkin, and it retained its distinctive chemical signature for months after removal. This came from Kethval of the 3rd clan, Jake said, holding up the gland. He tried to assassinate a human diplomat on New Geneva 3 months ago. Unfortunately for Kethval, the diplomat was actually a Terran Defense Force operative who had been expecting an attack. The fight lasted about 30 seconds. Jake's casual tone while discussing the death of a fellow Shadowkin sent waves of terror through Vexthal's body. The human was not just describing intelligence-gathering operations. He was describing a systematic campaign to hunt down and eliminate Shadowkin assassins throughout human space. Kethval was good, Jake continued, examining the scent gland, like it was an interesting artifact. 41 confirmed kills, trained by some of the best mentors on Kethmar, equipped with top-quality weapons and technology. But he made the same mistake that all of your people make when dealing with humans. Jake looked directly at Vexthal's position with those cold brown eyes that seemed to see through every form of concealment and protection. When he spoke again, his voice carried a tone of absolute certainty that made the Shadowkin's terror complete. He assumed that humans were prey. Vexthal had heard enough. Every instinct screamed that this situation had become impossible, but the Shadowkin's training and pride demanded one final attempt to salvage the mission. If Jake Morrison knew so much about Shadowkin capabilities, then perhaps the only option was to rely on the one advantage that no amount of intelligence gathering could overcome. Raw physical superiority, the Shadowkin, dropped its cloaking ability and materialized in the center of the maintenance chamber like a nightmare made flesh. 7 feet of black chitinous armor, 4 glowing eyes, and razor-sharp claws that could cut through steel plate. Vexthal had killed 43 beings using these natural weapons, and most of them had been much more physically impressive than one soft. Human. Jake Morrison looked at the fully revealed alien assassin with the same calm expression he had maintained throughout their entire conversation. He did not step backward, did not reach for weapons, did not show any sign of fear or surprise. He simply watched as Vexthal extended its claws and prepared to charge. "Interesting choice," Jake said quietly. Vexthal lunged forward with the speed that had made Shadowkin assassins legendary throughout the galaxy. The attack was perfectly executed, designed to drive the claws through Jake's chest before the human could react. It should have been over in less than 2 seconds. Instead, Jake moved like liquid mercury, twisting aside from the attack while simultaneously drawing a weapon that should not have existed. The device in his hand was small, black, and unmarked. But when he activated it, the maintenance chamber filled with a focused pulse of sound that hit Vexthal like a physical blow. The Shadowkin's sensitive hearing organs, designed to detect the slightest noise from prey or predators, suddenly felt like they were being torn apart from the inside. The sonic pulse was calibrated to exactly the frequency range that caused maximum pain to Shadowkin auditory systems. Vexthal stumbled, disoriented and in agony, while Jake calmly stepped out of range of the flailing claws. "Sonic disruptor, tuned specifically for Shadowkin hearing," Jake explained as Vexthal writhed on the floor, clutching at its head. "Another piece of technology we developed after studying your people. We noticed that your species relies heavily on audio cues for navigation and target acquisition. Take that away, and you become much less dangerous." Vexthal tried to stand, but the sonic assault had damaged its inner enough to destroy its balance. The chamber seemed to spin around the Shadowkin as it struggled to regain control of its body. Through the pain and disorientation, it could see Jake Morrison standing calmly nearby, the sonic weapon still ready in his hand. "The problem with being an apex predator," Jake said, "is that you stop expecting to meet anything more dangerous than yourself. Your entire species has been operating under the assumption that humans are weak, primitive creatures who got lucky with faster-than-light travel. You never considered that we might be something else entirely." Vexthal managed to get to its knees, but Jake had positioned himself between the alien and the only exit from the chamber. The human's stance was relaxed but ready, like someone who had been in similar situations many times before. His brown eyes tracked every movement the Shadowkin made, calculating distances and angles with the precision of a trained killer. "Here's what's going to happen," Jake continued in the same conversational tone he had used throughout their encounter. "You're going to return to whoever hired you for this contract. You're going to explain that Jake Morrison is under the protection of the Terran Defense Force and that any further attempts on his life will be met with appropriate responses." Jake activated his datapad again and showed Vexthal the holographic star map with its dozens of pulsing red dots. "You're also going to share this information with your clan leaders and anyone else who makes decisions about Shadowkin operations. In human space, those red dots represent every Shadowkin assassin we're currently tracking, all 47 of them. We know where they are, what they're doing, and how to find them whenever we want." The implications of Jake's words hit Vexthal like another sonic blast. The humans were not just defending against Shadowkin attacks. They were preparing to eliminate the entire Shadowkin presence in human space. Every assassin, every operative, every clan member who had ever taken a contract against human interests was now marked for death. "The Meridian Trading Consortium paid you to kill one human cargo coordinator," Jake said. "What they didn't know is that Jake Morrison is actually Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison, Terran Defense Force Intelligence Division. This entire assignment was a setup designed to capture or eliminate whatever Shadowkin operative they sent after me." Vexthal's 4 eyes widened as the final pieces of the trap became clear. The human had not been an innocent victim who happened to detect the assassination attempt. He had been bait, deliberately placed on Delta 7 to draw out Shadowkin attackers. The Meridian Consortium had been manipulated into hiring Shadowkin assassins so that human intelligence could study them more closely. Your people have been hunting humans for 8 months, Jake continued. But humans have been hunting your people for much longer than that. We've been preparing for this conflict since the first time a Shadowkin assassin killed a human target. Every attack you made against us provided more intelligence, more data, more understanding of how to defeat you. Jake put away the sonic disruptor but kept his hand near other weapons that Vexthal could not identify. The difference between Shadowkin and humans is that you see assassination as an individual art form. You take pride in working alone, in keeping your methods secret, in maintaining the mystery that makes people fear you. But humans approach warfare as a collective effort. When you killed our people, you weren't just fighting individual humans, you were fighting all of humanity. The human's words carried the weight of absolute certainty, backed up by the evidence he had already provided. Vexthal understood that this was not a bluff or an attempt at psychological manipulation. Jake Morrison was stating simple facts about a war that the Shadowkin had started without realizing they were fighting an entire species. Every human ship that travels through this sector now carries anti-Shadowkin detection equipment, Jake said. Every human station has security protocols designed specifically to identify and neutralize Shadowkin infiltrators. Every human diplomat, trader, and cargo coordinator has been briefed on Shadowkin tactics and trained in basic counter-assassination techniques. Jake gestured toward the chamber around them. This maintenance area, for example, is equipped with sensors that can track cloaked Shadowkin, sonic disruptors calibrated to your hearing range, and emergency containment fields that can trap anything. Up to 7.5 feet tall? We built these defenses into Delta 7 specifically because we knew the Meridian Consortium would eventually hire Shadowkin assassins to deal with their human problem. Vexthal slowly got to its feet, moving carefully, to avoid provoking another sonic attack. The Shadowkin's hearing was still damaged, making it difficult to judge distances or detect subtle sounds. But more importantly, its confidence was completely shattered. Everything that had made the Shadowkin species feared throughout the galaxy had been analyzed, understood, and countered by creatures they had considered primitive prey animals. The choice you make now will determine what happens to your entire species, Jake said. You can return to your clan leaders and convince them to end all operations against human interests. Your people can find new clients, new targets, new hunting grounds in parts of the galaxy where humans have no presence. Or you can continue to see humans as prey and discover what happens when prey animals decide to hunt back. Jake activated his datapad one final time and showed Vexthal a new display. This one showed the locations of Shadowkin homeworlds, training facilities, and clan strongholds. Information that should have been impossible for any outsider to obtain was laid out in perfect detail, including population estimates, defensive capabilities, and strategic weaknesses. We know where you come from, Jake said quietly. We know how you train, how you organize, how you think. If Shadowkin continue to threaten human interests, we won't just defend ourselves. We'll eliminate the threat at its source. The message was clear and terrifying. Humanity possessed the intelligence networks, the technology, and the strategic planning necessary to wage war against the Shadowkin homeworlds themselves. The species that had dominated galactic assassination for thousands of years was facing potential extinction at the hands of creatures they had thought were helpless. Vexthal moved slowly toward the chamber exit, keeping its movements non-threatening while Jake watched every step. When the Shadowkin reached the doorway, it paused and looked back at the human who had systematically destroyed everything it had believed about the galaxy's power structure. The contract is terminated, Vexthal said in the harsh, clicking language of its people. Jake Morrison nodded once. Smart choice. Have a safe trip home. 2 hours later, Vexthal's ship departed Delta 7 without completing its mission. The Shadowkin assassin, who had never failed a contract in 43 attempts, was returning home empty-handed, carrying news that would forever change how its species viewed humanity. Word spread quickly through the galactic underworld that something had gone wrong on Delta 7.